claim to be.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
Aliens are extra-dimensional beings.
It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe.
Welcome to Dark Discoveries.
Greetings. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the case may be, whenever this episode finds you, wherever you are. I am your host, Jacob Kimbrough. What a show I have lined up for you today. A mind-melting show, some may say. Pun intended. You'll find out later. Pun intended. This is the first official episode of Dark Discoveries, and I'm glad you're along for the ride. So again, I say welcome. This is pretty heady stuff, and honestly, of like the first 6 or 7 topics that I did deep dives on, this is middle of the pack when it comes to darkness factor. We'll call it an 8.5 out of 10 on the darkness scale. It's just mind-boggling how expansive this government program was, and really, I didn't realize how far back it went. So before we get into all that, I gotta say that the subject is ultimately MK Ultra, and a lot of people have heard of MK Ultra. It's kind of a buzzword anymore. It's definitely pushed its way into pop culture. There's a lot of examples of truth serums and mind control that have pushed their way into popular culture. And when it comes down to it, that's what MK Ultra is all about. But before we jump right into MK Ultra, we have to start back a ways. There's a program called Project Chatter, which is where it all began. This is a Navy program that began in the fall of 1947, so, we're just a couple years removed from the end of World War II. The government was ultra paranoid, the citizens were paranoid, for good reason. The Soviet Empire had become an empire. I mean, they held all these different satellite countries, and they were viewed as a large superpower. And there was reports that the Soviets and the Chinese had perfected a drug or a serum or even a technique of mind control. Our government was worried that they had figured out a way to control people's minds, and they knew if that was the case, it was only a matter of time before it was used on us, the American people, and that would be world ender in their eyes. They viewed it as an existential threat. There was nothing more important than figuring out how to combat this new warfare that would be the end of freedom and liberty once those dirty commie bastards took over our minds. So, the first thing they did was they created the program Project Chatter. Now, this was a Navy program. It began in the fall of 47. The fervor is going around that the Soviets have all this technology. So they're worried on focusing the identification of what compound or procedure technique was being used by the Soviets. Now, this research included lab experiments on animals and humans. The subjects involved were given Anabasis aphylla, which is a type of flower, and derived from that flower is certain pesticides. Scopolamine, which in its powder form is known as devil's breath due to the purported ability to induce a suggestive state. Today it's sometimes used in surgeries to control saliva output. I probably should look into that for my recordings. Mescaline was used. There was a few other drugs being used but those were the ones of import that I could find in the Senate intelligence document that stated these specific compounds were used in order to determine their speech-inducing qualities. Whatever that means, you would assume they would have figured out as soon as they were shoving people full of amphetamines, they're going to talk. But I digress. Now, these different projects that we'll be talking about, they're basically all the same. They're just different in their scope and the location in which they took place. So Project Chatter, which begins it all, is overseas experiments being conducted as part of the project. Now, this project was expanded substantially between 47 and 53, and it ended, consequently, in 1953. But the only reason that is because they already had another set of programs that were studying the same thing. They were just being studied by the CIA with Project Bluebird. And now, Project Bluebird was founded or authorized in 1950. I found some fund authorization documents from 1950 signed by Alan Dulles, who I believe at this time was the CIA director. If not now, in 1950, he would in fact become the CIA director very soon. And if you know anything about Alan Dulles, him and his brother John Foster Dulles, who was the Secretary of State 1953 to 1959 under Eisenhower, the same time that Alan Dulles was the CIA director. They kind of had a stronghold on a couple different parts of government, and that's how these programs were able to be kept under wraps. They knew the right palms to grease. They knew the right people not to tell things to, and they were pretty sketchy characters, frankly, if you look into them. I'm sure I'll do a dark discovery on the Dulles brothers later, because man, there's a lot there to be had. So Bluebird, 1950 fund authorization I found from 1950 was asking for $65,000, which in 1950, $65,000, the equivalency in 2023 would be $811,000, which, I mean, we know how much the government spends on pet projects based on these omnibus spending bills that come out each year. Some of the most bizarre spending that I found just from this last omnibus spending bill in December of 22, we spent $2.3 million injecting 6-month-old beagle puppies with cocaine to see how they react. Hello? PETA? I mean, I know you're out there. I see you all the time, so what's up with that? Speaking to PETA, $1.1 million was spent for training mice to binge drink alcohol. That one's pretty wild. The one that gets me the most, though, and I kind of can see some value to it, I mean, I might pay a pay-per-view for this, is $3 million on a study at Northeastern University that involved injecting hamsters with steroids and watching them fight. So basically a hamster fight club. Probably some entertainment value to that, and that makes me lose a little faith in my own humanity. So, Project Bluebird became Project Artichoke. There's documents to show that they're two different programs, but in this Senate intelligence, the penultimate document that I found from the 1977 Senate Intelligence Committee looking deeper into MK Ultra, it says that Bluebird and Artichoke were both funded by the same discretionary funding. They just used different names based on one was still more overseas and the other one was more on the North American continent. Not just the United States, but also Canadians. They were used as subjects on a lot of these studies, CIA studies especially. We definitely went to our neighbors to the north, and we used them as much as we could. The only real way that I'm seeing Project Bluebird and Artichoke differing from Project Chatter, because we know the similarities between the two quasi programs would be that they're using whatever concoction of drugs they can to create a truth serum. The way they begin to differ is that instead of just using drugs, and this is the prevalent theme that moves into MK Ultra, they're using any means necessary, starting with Bluebird and Artichoke. Whatever they can use to try and mind control, they do. They utilize polygraph tests in combination with drugs. Hypnotism was a big deal. They want to attain the greatest results in interrogation techniques. That's a quote. They want to attain the greatest results in interrogation techniques. The document goes on to say that this interest in personality control stems from recent spy trials in Hungary and other satellite nations. Within a number of areas of CIA, there has developed considerable interest in the field of hypnotism, and one of the basic purposes of this program is to bring all such interests within the purview and control of a single project. It is extremely important that any action by the CIA in these fields be restricted to the minimum number of persons on a top-secret basis to prevent compromise and unfavorable repercussions. Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the repercussions would certainly be unfavorable if people find out the crap you're pulling here. The document wraps up by saying, unless highly specialized, no one should attempt or experiment with these such techniques. And yeah, some of these techniques, they go beyond just drugging and hypnotizing. And we'll see that as we get further along. At this point, I think it's safe to, well, maybe not safe, but it's the appropriate time to introduce the main mastermind behind MK Ultra. He comes into the story before 1951. He was not a part of these programs, but on July 13th, 1951, Sidney Gottlieb, or Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, I guess I should say, has his first day of work at the CIA. Now, I'm not going to go too in-depth into Sidney Gottlieb because that is going to be another dark discovery. His accolades go farther than just MK Ultra. And boy howdy, he has some accolades. So I'll just start from 1951, his first day of work at the CIA. The then deputy director, Alan Dulles, hires him. He had an advanced knowledge of poisons. He was a chemist who was very well regarded. He knew extensively about agriculture. He even did a stint with the FDA and learned quite a bit about hallucinogens. So when Gottlieb was hired, Project Bluebird was well underway. As we went over, it experimented with special interrogation techniques. Now, the difference between MK Ultra and Project Bluebird and Artichoke, we'll just call them Blartichoke, just kidding, Bluebird and Artichoke, is that they focused still more exclusively overseas. They had these CIA black sites, which, you know, we still know those exist, but the CIA black sites in countries like Germany, the Philippines, Japan, countries that we had a very high presence of GI in the late 40s and early 50s, you know, post-World War II. So Gottlieb was sent overseas, sent to these CIA black sites to start adding a more scientific element to these projects, because with Project Chatter, that was the biggest knock on it, according to the CIA and other government agencies. The biggest knock on it was there wasn't very many scientists on board. It was more of a cluster fund. They become more specialized on these separate techniques, and they bring in some more outside sources that in their eyes are the best of the best, which Sidney Gottlieb was the best of the best. There's no doubting that. I mean, he was basically an evil genius, so there's that. When they bring Sidney Gottlieb on, lots of crazy stuff starts happening. First and foremost, they start looking into the ability of, or the potential of, certain diseases. They looked at dengue fever to see if it could play a role in this whole mind control experiment. A declassified memo from that time in 5152, it says not all viruses have to be lethal. The objective includes that these diseases can act as short-term and long-term incapacitating agents. I mean, I could have told you that without the testing. I mean, come on. So they bring Gottlieb on. They start expanding their search into different drugs, different, obviously, diseases, different tactics, techniques. And this is when Bluebird / Artichoke gets, the majority of it gets rolled into what a new project called Project MK Ultra. Project MK Ultra officially launched in April of 1953. As we know, the study into mind control has already been going on for 6 years, but it's been a little more frayed. They've not had the major scientific elements in the country working on it because they're keeping it as secret as they possibly can. They can't just, advertise to whoever. They have to keep it hush hush. No one can find out about what they're doing. They're dealing in biological warfare now by going through looking at these diseases and their effects on people. After the Nuremberg trials, the Nuremberg Code is instituted, and people are not supposed to be tested on without their consent, first and foremost. You're not supposed to use biological warfare, period. There shouldn't be any testing done on biological warfare because, supposedly we all agree that this is a horrible, unethical form of warfare. We can't do it, or it's going to end. It's going to end the world in the end. There's going to be a bug that's too strong that will kill us all. But the United States was afraid that the Soviet Union, the paranoia had shifted things to such a fervor that they were afraid that the Soviets and the Chinese were already doing these things. So basically, we have to do this because they're doing it, but we have to do it better than they do it. Funding greatly expands as Sidney Gottlieb is brought into the program. That funding is still well hidden. We still don't know today to what extent this program was funded. Sidney Gottlieb was more than just a great chemist. He was good at hiding where the funding was going. As MK Ultra began, he created a bunch of fake organizations. And when he created these fake organizations, at the same time, he convinced the CIA to buy the world's supply of LSD. Now, this is where the LSD comes into the story. Before then, so let's go on the LSD trip, the timeline, if you will. It was first synthesized, I believe, in 1936, but wouldn't be tested until 1943 on a human subject. The synthesizer, Albert Hoffman, when he finds out what LSD really is and what it can do. So we're only 10 years removed from that. LSD is not a known commodity in the world, not even the science world. It's pretty fringe. But the U.S. government hears that the Soviets have found LSD. They found how to synthesize it. They know that it has mind-controlling capabilities, and this is the way they're perfecting it. So Sidney Gottlieb buys the world supply of LSD from Sandoz Laboratories for $270,000 in 1953, which equates to about $2.3 million in today's terms. This was for over 100 million doses of LSD. And what they did under the new Project MK Ultra, we have greatly expanded our experimentation on Americans. The subjects were referred to as expendables. And I guess they figured, why are we going to test overseas when we've got a whole plethora of expendables at home? So Gottlieb starts these faux organizations, these fake organizations that they're giving tons of money and they're giving tons of LSD and other drugs still. But LSD really comes to the forefront on the testing. And they're giving it to these different organizations through fake organizations. They're giving it to different colleges. They're giving it to Stanford University, to Harvard. They're giving it to hospitals. They're giving it to prisons. They're giving it to anyone and everybody who will help them with their experiments, because they want to figure out how to control minds. And they want to see how LSD works, how these other things work. So at the same time, this is where Operation Midnight Climax comes in, where they open bordellos in San Francisco and they look at what happens when you dose a John. And they have people behind one-way glass documenting how LSD affects these Johns in their dissemination of their deepest secrets, and if they talk about things that they normally wouldn't talk about to these prostitutes that they've just had sex with. I mean, it sort of seems pretty doomed from the get-go. From there, they go buck wild, pun intended, on testing all across the states. At this time, this is where we have some of the most well-known subjects come into play here in the early days of the testing through the university programs and hospital and prisons. Now, from what I have found, the majority of the testing in universities were done on willing participants. The problem is they weren't told the truth about what they're being given. Now, I don't know if the universities knew or didn't know. I don't know if the CIA didn't tell them the truth about what they were giving them. I think they gave them the LSD and then told them, we just need you to document what this is. We're trying to find a cure for X, Y, and Z, or we're trying to find what this specific compound does to people, whatever. Either way, the universities were complicit because they were getting paid, so why not? Some of the notable subjects that were a part of these trials were our author Ken Kesey. He wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, was a ardent supporter of LSD. He actually he became part of the trial in a VA hospital, and he enjoyed LSD and his trip so much that he got a job at the VA so he could steal LSD for himself and his friends. And he did that for a while, and that's where the subject material for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest came from, was his time at the VA hospital. Some other notable subjects include legendary poet beatnik Allen Ginsberg. He was subjected to these trials in a university experiment, as well as Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter, who, I mean, all three of these guys became huge proponents and advocates for LSD. Some of the more sinister subjects include mobster Whitey Bulger, who, come to find out, was an FBI informant. I had no idea. They totally blew his cover towards the end of his life. But he was in an Atlanta prison, and according to him, he was dosed with LSD almost every day for over a year. And he didn't realize what was being done, because the doctor at this Atlanta penitentiary had told the subjects that they were being tested for a schizophrenia medication to see how it affects them. Well, they're dosing Whitey Bulger and others with LSD every day for a year without them knowing what's going on. Whitey Bulger would write that he thought he was going absolutely insane. He wouldn't tell the doctor exactly what was going on. He would see the clock on the wall bouncing and vibrating, and he could see the ticks of the clock, and he thought he was nuts. He said it almost broke his mind, which may have been the test, frankly. So we know that they were testing on unwitting subjects in prisons and most everywhere that they were doing their testing. Some alleged suspects would be Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. He was part of some kind of mind-altering testing done at Harvard when he was 17 years old. That's definitely going to be a dark discovery in the future, so I won't go any further into that. Author Tom O'Neill, the author of the book Chaos, ties Charles Manson to the MKUltra experiments. And if you haven't read that book, Chaos, it is a fantastic read. And you will see that it is more than just circumstantial evidence that ties Charles Manson to the MKUltra experiments. We'll have a dark discovery on Charles Manson, and I'm sure we'll go deeper into that whole thread. Sirhan is believed to be a Manchurian candidate. It is believed that he was subjected to MKUltra mind control and, in fact, was able to be turned into a Manchurian candidate. That's where the whole Jason Bourne, all that popular culture about creating the ultimate killing machines who can do it without any remorse or without even knowledge of what they're doing. So if they get caught, there's nothing for them to give up. They're literally just a tool. Sirhan's lawyer basically came up with the theory that he was a Manchurian candidate, and he tied it into these mind control experiments. Whether that's true or not, who knows? No one will know, ever. As we talked earlier, the scope of Project Chatter and Bluebird, Artichoke, they started small and were quickly growing as the fervor and belief that the Soviets had this technology close to perfected, as well as the fact that the CIA leaders, director Dr. Sidney Gottlieb in particular, thought they were getting close. They're getting close to figuring this out. Whether that meant that mind control couldn't happen, that's a possibility, but they knew that the only way to figure it out was to go full bore. Something that I forgot to mention, when Sidney Gottlieb first came on to the scene, one of his first questions was, well, as any scientific mind often postulates, what work has already begun on this topic? Does anyone else know about this? Has anyone done any research on this? So we're not starting from a point where we know nothing. At least we can have a basis to go forward from. So when you're looking for the most evil practices committed in the past 20, 30 years, where do you go? Of course you go to the Nazi and Japanese concentration camps. And they seen that there was work being done on trying to subdue and control human minds. Author Stephen Kinzer writes in his book Poisoner in Chief about Sidney Gottlieb and MKUltra, another great book if you haven't read it. Kinzer writes that MKUltra's use of mescaline on unwitting subjects was a practice that Nazi doctors had begun in the camps at Auschwitz and Dachau. Kinzer gives evidence of the continuation of a Nazi agenda, citing the CIA's secret recruitment of Nazi torturers and vivisectionists to continue experimenting on thousands of subjects, and Nazis were brought to Fort Detrick, Maryland to instruct CIA officers on the lethal uses of sarin gas. So that goes back to Artichoke, when they were first starting to look into how gases, diseases, any biological warfare worked, and how they could use it to control minds. So they brought in Nazis to to try to figure out how to subvert the Soviet brain perversion techniques. They wanted to figure it out for themselves, so they could properly understand how to combat it, or to use it if they needed to against the Soviets. I'm not giving the CIA or the United States government the excuse for perpetrating these war crimes against their own people. I'm just stating that's what they said was the reason for all of this. So between 1953 and 1963, this testing was going on. And the funny thing about it is Sidney Gottlieb, who talks the CIA into buying up the world's supply of LSD, unwittingly becomes the godfather of LSD. He helps create the counterculture who completely and totally want to dismantle the war movement and the institution that he's a part of, which I found pretty hilarious. Now, this paranoia that the government was experiencing did not dwindle. As we know, the Cold War lasted for many, many years into the future, until the fall of the Soviet Union. Even today, we're basically in a full-fledged Cold War once again. It's more of a perpetual proxy war that we find ourselves in currently. But one of the first thoughts I had as I was researching this topic was, well, how many people do we know of that died because of these heinous acts in the name of research? We only know of one for sure. That's not because more didn't die. Obviously, more died. I mean, they were pumping amphetamines into one vein and then barbiturates into the other, and all kinds of other combinations of torture. We are also testing heroin, morphine, mescaline, psilocybin, scopolamine, alcohol, sodium pentothal. I mean, we're using anything and everything we can possibly use to try to break down these minds, to build them back up, to figure out how each of these compounds works by themselves, together. I know more than one person died, but only one person's death has been attributed to Project MKUltra. And it was actually one of their own, a United States Army biochemist and biological weapons researcher, Frank Olson. He was given LSD without his knowledge or consent in 1953 as part of a CIA experiment. He died after falling from a 13th story window a week later. A CIA doctor assigned to monitor Olson claimed to have been asleep in another bed in a New York City hotel room when Olson fell to his death. Right, yeah. In 1953, Olson's death was described as a suicide that had occurred during a severe psychotic episode. It's somehow comforting to know that we've been suiciding people for a while. Insert obligatory, Epstein didn't kill himself. The CIA's own internal investigation concluded that the head of MKUltra, CIA chemist Sidney Gottlieb, had conducted the LSD experiment with Olson's prior knowledge, although neither Olson nor the other men taking part in the experiment were informed as to the exact nature of the drug until some 20 minutes after its ingestion. You're going to go on a trip, you want to know you're going on the trip before you go on the trip, right? That's how you have a bad time. The report further suggested that Gottlieb was nonetheless due a reprimand, as he had failed to take into account Olson's already diagnosed suicidal tendencies, which may have been exacerbated by the LSD. Now, the Olson family disputes these official version of events. They maintain that Frank Olson was murdered because, and especially in the aftermath of his LSD experiment, he had become a security risk who might divulge state secrets associated with highly classified CIA programs, about many of which he had personal direct knowledge. Now, I don't know if that's because LSD is a truth serum. Don't believe that's the case. I think it's because he had enough of the CIA's crap and was going to divulge those secrets. A few days before his death, Frank Olson quit his position as acting chief of the Special Operations Division at Dietrich, Maryland, which was later Fort Detrick, which we talked a little bit about earlier. Because of a severe moral crisis concerning the nature of his biological weapons research, he resigned. Among Olson's concerns were the development of assassination materials used by the CIA's use of biological warfare materials in covert operations, experimentation with biological weapons in populated areas, collaboration with former Nazi scientists, LSD mind control research on unwitting participants, and the use of psychoactive drugs during, quote, terminal, unquote, interrogations under a program named Project Artichoke. Later forensic evidence conflicted with the official version of events. When Olson's body was exhumed in 1994, cranial injuries indicated that Olson had been knocked unconscious before he exited the window. I mean, wow. How they could tell that is amazing. The medical examiner termed Olson's death a homicide. In 1975, Olson's family received a $750,000 settlement. In 1975, Olson's family received a $750,000 settlement from the U.S. government and formal apologies from then-President Gerald Ford and CIA Director William Colby, though their apologies were limited to informed consent issues concerning Olson's ingestion of LSD. $750,000 in 1975 is the equivalent to a little over $4 million today. So 1975, you have the Church Commission comes out, and they're looking into all the improprieties of the intelligence community, and this is where MKUltra first comes to the public forefront. In 1974, you had legendary reporter Seymour Hersh basically blow the lid open on MKUltra a year before the Church Committee hearings. He would never burn his source. He wrote about a huge CIA operation, and he reported on specific details that were major improprieties being done by the CIA that would be confirmed starting just a year later. Now, this Church Committee, chaired by Democratic Senator Frank Church from Idaho, had been put together in 1975, was a U.S. Senate Select Committee. And like I said, they were investigating improprieties from the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, and the IRS primarily. We'll probably do a discovery on the Church Committee somewhere down the line. But just to give you the brass tacks here, it was shocking revelations included COINTELPRO, which was the government infiltrating domestic organizations, Operation Mockingbird, Shamrock. There were elements of Operation Paperclip, which is what involved the Nazis that had been unknown before, that were brought forth at this committee. Operation MKUltra was talked about during the Church Committee. Really, the biggest thing they found about MKUltra was the fact that in 1973, then CIA Director Richard Helms had ordered Sidney Gottlieb and his underlings to destroy every document on MKUltra because they were out the door. Sidney Gottlieb was retiring in 73, and Richard Helms was a part of the Watergate scandal. He said unknowingly, but based on all the events here, who knows? So he was on his way out, and they destroyed all the paperwork from MKUltra. They had Sidney Gottlieb come forth and testify about this under a pseudonym. And when Gottlieb was interviewed by the Church Committee, he claimed to have very little recollection of the activities of MKUltra. Yeah, I'm sure he did. I'm sure he couldn't remember. He couldn't recall all the experiments they were doing.
I can't seem to recall what me and my my CIA brethren had done. It was, in fact, so long ago.
In 73, when Gottlieb and his minions destroyed documents, they destroyed an untold number of documents. And they thought they destroyed everything, but there was a cache in a depot of about 20,000 documents that were left over. And this is the only way that we come to learn anything about MKUltra, because before that, all that we learned was contained in one report prepared by the Inspector General's office in 1963. Other than that, they didn't think that anything survived until they found this cache of 20,000 documents.
Oopsie daisy.
I'm well aware my German accent is garbage. But even then, the cachet had very little detail in comparison of what had to be pieced together after the fact. In 1977, there was a Senate Select Committee on Intelligence to look further into MKUltra. And on this Select Senate Committee, I thought it was pretty wild to see Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.'s name on it. He was part of this Select Senate Committee on Intelligence in 1977. 1977. I mean, do we have to have 80-year-old politicians running everything? I mean, does it really make sense? Gosh. Moving on. This is where it was really brought forth that the deputy director of the CIA reveals over 30 universities and institutions involved in this extensive testing and experimentation program, which included covert drug tests on unwitting citizens, quote, at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans, foreign immigrants, unquote. Several of these tests involved the administration of LSD and other drugs to unwitting subjects in social situations, private situations. As I stated before, there's only one death has been attributed to it, of Frank Olson, but we know that there's more. The CIA itself subsequently acknowledges that the test had little scientific rationale. Sidney Gottlieb, at the end, in 1963, says that there's no such thing as mind control. Mind control can't be done. Is this because they perfected it? Or they perfected it to the point that it could be perfected? Or is it because there is no such thing as mind control? I don't think we'll know the answer to that specific question. However, I do believe it's even highly likelihood that through these tests we figured out that people are very highly suggestible. I think our society proves out today that there are different ways that minds can be persuaded. I mean, you have, starting in the propaganda of the 40s, the World War II propaganda, I mean, it worked like a charm. The advertising agencies and the ability to persuade people a certain way. And we know that's the whole purpose of it. And if it didn't work, there wouldn't have been a 80-year boon on advertising. So we know it works. I don't know if that's has anything whatsoever to do with MKUltra. Probably doesn't. Who knows? And now for today's top 5 dark discoveries. Starting with number 1. At least 3 different government programs immediately preceding World War II tested biological weapons, drugs, and used psychological torture to learn how to control one's mind. Was it successful or not? Who knows? Number 2. We tested unwitting subjects in an attempt to break their minds for over a decade, and most certainly destroyed plenty of lives along the way. Untold amounts of lives destroyed. Who knows how many people died. Number 3, we continued Nazi and Japanese concentration camp atrocities under the guise of trying to beat the other guy to the punch. We were taking freedoms to protect our freedom? How does that make any sense? Number 4, these projects were being perpetrated right under the noses of the American people under the name of scientific advance, without the knowledge of the true intent of these scientific advancements. And number 5, and most importantly to me, my Google search history is now in shambles. I am most certainly on a list or two after the searches for not only this show, but our upcoming shows. There's no hope for my Google history. I'm sure starting the next couple of days I get on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, I'm going to start seeing some ads and some videos that are probably just going to be a little too much. But in all honesty, one of the most chilling takeaways I have from all of this is if the government was doing this then under the guise of keeping our freedoms, giving up a little bit of freedom for some security. Who knows what they're doing today? There's no reason to believe that MK Ultra really did cease in 63 or 73 or whenever. That's probably when that program ceased to exist, but surely they continued it in other ways, shapes, and forms. And now I just want to go ahead and say thank you to everyone who has listened to this whole rambling mess. And we did it. We made it through the first show. It will get better. I will do my best to try to keep it more linear and not skip around in the story. I understand I'm releasing this one a little early. It'll give me the proper amount of time to get ahead before we release our next episode. More than likely this Wednesday. Again, thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to tell you about the next dark discovery. And between now and then, let your eyes adjust to the dark. I'll be talking to you soon.